to where they want to be.
Right. I got one that I'm going to throw out, and she doesn't even know.
You're listening to America's Web Radio.
Yes, sir.
Broadcastnetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Mama, mama, can't you see what the Army's done to me? Mama, mama, can you see what the Army's done to me? I used to wear designer jeans. Now I'm wearing these Army greens. I used to wear designer jeans. Now I'm wearing these Army greens. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. I used to drive a Cadillac. Now I'm humping it on my back. I used to drive a Cadillac. Now I'm humping it on my back. Whoa, 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 whoa. Outstanding. I'm going to cut it off right there because I got somebody who knows me from way back when. And if I keep going, I know he's going to probably lock my heels. But America's Web Radio, I'm proud to introduce and honored to have my first guest, Lieutenant Colonel retired Al Wilson. He was my company commander during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and I couldn't think of anyone more fitting to be our first guest, David.
You know, this show is gaining momentum and meaning by the fact that I'm glad we started it to keep people remembering Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
Absolutely.
I've even gone so far as asking folks, Desert Shield, you know, and looking at them like with a question mark, which is easy for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad. So many people have already, it was just yesterday.
Absolutely. It feels that way for the two of us that are on this show. Al, can you give us a perspective from a brand new company commander arriving at Fort Stewart and what it meant coming out of Germany and the Cold War era and going into a hot kinetic action in such a short period?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. First of all, I'd like to thank Brigadier General Dix for having me on this show. As he mentioned earlier, we are now lifelong friends. He's become the godfather of my children. And, you know, it all started on a lonely day at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and we're still going. So basically, General Dix said, I am Al Wilson, retired, combination of 30 years reserve and active experience. And with Desert Storm, Desert Shield, it was, for me, the biggest conversion of my life that I think I've had, where I'm a young lieutenant coming from Germany after 3 years, ready to fight the Cold War, ready to go to Fold the Gap and just take care of business. And I get to Fort Stewart, Georgia on July 15th, 1990. Get promoted to captain on August 1st. We go on alert on my birthday, August 2nd, and about 3 weeks later, we're sitting in Saudi Arabia about to, you know, launch into Iraq. So at that point, took company command of the headquarters 224 Support Battalion, 4th Support Battalion supporting the 2nd Brigade, and then of 24th Infantry Division, of course. And I meet this guy again, this Lieutenant Dix, who is looking for a job. He's been banged up, and the tanker said he needs to go hang out somewhere in a hospital somewhere, but this guy goes, I can lead soldiers, I'm ready to go. So long story short, he becomes my XO. And here we are, 30 years almost later.
Absolutely.
Talking about this war, and it's crazy. It seems like yesterday, but it's been a long time. And basically that ship was monumental because our army was, in my opinion, was ready to fight in Europe day in, day out and win. But all of a sudden I come to Fort Stewart, Georgia, I see desert colored vehicles, join a unit that's been to the National Training Center a lot. I had never been at that point. I've been to, you know, Grafenwehr, Hohenfels. So all of a sudden we're transitioning to a possible tank war in the desert. And when I met then Lieutenant Dix, General Dix, you know, I think he taught me a lot about tactics, and I tried to teach him a little bit about logistics. and he took that and ran with it. So Desert Storm was definitely a milestone for us, I think.
So you told me a lot about logistics. So I'm the logistician I am today because of you and those jump BSA missions that you threw me out there on all over the deserts of southern Iraq.
Sir, what did you think about our government sending troops over in OD green tanks and armor when it was a rather sandy day? Not the first time, but one of the times I went to Stewart, there were spray painting going on.
Right. And the DOL, the Director of Logistics at Fort Stewart, someone should still be putting a medal on their chest, because I think they painted the entire division as we were leaving, and to do that with minimal notice, in my opinion, was just phenomenal, because everything was green. And like I said, when I landed at Fort Stewart and saw the desert vehicles, I had never really seen them before, because I've been in Germany 3 years. So the Director of Logistics there, all the logisticians at Fort Stewart, Georgia, were able to get as many of those vehicles painted before we deployed. We were also able, I think, and Richard may remember, I remember General Kern, who was our brigade commander, Paul Kern.
Right.
I remember receiving an Army Commendation Medal for having the first unit to be ready to deploy with all of our equipment. And what you think was routine was not routine anymore, because we had to draw desert equipment, we had to draw desert gear, we had to make sure, like you said, our vehicles were painted, and it took a lot. And and all those logisticians that I've seen grow out of that Desert Shield experience, they became Army leaders. General Dix, I mean, so many others, they became Army leaders, and I think that experience just changed the way we fought, but it changed the way we developed leaders in the Army. Because you had to be not just a brainy guy, you had to be a guy that could think, or a young lady or young man as a leader that could think and work, not outside of the box, but just forget that there was a box and make it happen.
Absolutely.
And when I talk to General Dix, I always think about the proudest day I've ever seen when I talk about this guy on this radio show is that he sent me a picture years ago with Vice President Dick Cheney putting a medal on his neck for being instrumental in setting up the logistics in Afghanistan. And when I talked to General Dix after that, he told me, then Colonel Dix, he told me that, we basically did the same thing we did in Saudi. There was no infrastructure. We had to really think and make things happen. And just, if we prayed that it worked, thank God. But we had to make sure that we developed systems that made people and allowed leaders to think and be flexible and be able to command their units.
Excuse me, Colonel. I was just talking about the Jody that General Dix did, and he talked about now, I'm in my Army greens. Well, everything was green. The uniform was,
right.
Were we prepared enough that they could issue desert fatigues?
Not to everyone, because as I said, the rapid deployment force, in my memory, most of us were able to get those things, but it was very hard to get them. Right? It was, you had people sewing on uniforms and putting uniforms together in Saudi Arabia, because a lot of people, especially the guys that came later on for Germany, they came with green. The 24th was desert. General McCaffrey made sure we were ready, right? Yep. But even he, I think, had to think out of the box to make that happen. So I think when you look at it, we were green. We were ready to do something else. But I think what history needs to remember is that this force was able to convert on a dime and go over into the desert. And sure, we had a lot of logistical challenges, because in Germany, with the green uniforms, you had warehouses, you had a supply system that had worked for for over 40 years. Yep. And here we go to Saudi Arabia, and we're buying the blue buckets to take a bath in, because we had no infrastructure. We're building showers. We were putting water purification units in place. So it was a very austere place that we had no significant infrastructure for logistics.
Sir, how much of this do you think the public knows?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think they know. I think if you think of General Pagonis's book, it told a lot. I don't think it's a lot that's been written, and I do encourage General Dix to sit down, and we laugh about this all the time. You know, he needs to write a book because he was
somebody else
part of
that too, I think.
Right, but Sir David, you're right. It's not a lot that's been written, in my opinion, about the effort that it took to convert a Cold War army to a desert nimble army, and things just like air filters. You know, they last maybe double the time in Germany versus a day or two in the desert because of the sand. I mean, it's just simple things that I think people consider, but we never had to put into action until that time. But now again, what happens? American soldier has made us the best in the world at that as well. As fighting in the desert, the best in the world. So it goes back to, you could take all the modernization, all the equipment, you take all of the uniforms, but it's that heart of that soldier that made that happen.
Absolutely. And you deployed years later through AMC and other units.
Right.
The things that you learned in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, how easy was it to implement those later on successive deployments?
Wow. It was a lot easier the second time. Again, infrastructure was there. And you look at the comparison the first time, I think I called home about 5 times in 9 months because you had to wait on the phone line for 3 hours to make a 10-minute phone call, right? When I went back in 04, you know this, went back in 04, there's a computer at my desk that I can email, or I can pick up the phone and call home or what have you. So it's a big difference, in how the world shifted in that period of time between Desert Storm and Iraqi freedom, enduring freedom.
Right.
So, and logistically, of course, I think we learned so much when it comes to preposition shifts, when it comes to having equipment in certain locations where you can get to it quicker instead of shipping it from Fort Stewart, Georgia to Saudi Arabia. You had places, had equipment at other places.
Right.
I think the way the maneuvers for the combat arms teams fought, it developed. It developed into what we could have done in Europe. I think if there had been a World War III, we took it to the desert, and again, those leaders made it work.
Right.
Those leaders were able to redefine doctrine and make it work. So again, it all goes back to that soldier.
So a lot of
the general.
The questions that you asked earlier, David, about the OD green and painting and the uniforms, 24th Infantry Division had a war reserve that was designated for the Middle East because that was their primary mission. The problem, everybody else was facing Europe, and theirs was OD green and designed to fight in, the Ardennes Forest or the Fulda Gap, and it's all rolling hills, green, a woodland area. So when you had to shift, you really had to shift, and it took a while. So they came with what they had, and then, as Colonel Wilson said, they got outfitted later. But what that did for today's Army is we strategically placed those war reserves around the world, as Colonel Wilson alluded to where you have those prepositioned stocks now. So you can move a lot faster, fall in on those stocks, and go right into a battle position or a defense and, really take care of whatever threat is out there.
Sir, were you active when you went to Iraq or Desert Shield?
Was I active duty?
Yes, sir.
Oh yes, I was. I was a young captain. I was promoted at August 1st, and we deployed 15, 17 days later.
Yep.
I was still active duty at the time.
Okay.
And when I went back, I went as a reservist, as a planner for CFLIC.
Well, let me ask. We want to do, or I want to do, another show called Left Behind. So you've had the experience in both cases. You were married when you went the first time, right? Correct.
Right.
And then you were married when you went the second time as an AR.
Right.
So.
Same woman.
That's
30 years. Be 31 years in May.
The thing that I look at is a base, a fort, is a family. Whereas when you deploy from being a reservist, you got your next door neighbor. Maybe there's not the camaraderie. There's not the closeness of a fort or a base, and it's got to be. Your wife had to there had to be some transitioning on your wife saying, okay,
Right.
well, I had the support of the fort when Fort Stewart or wherever you left from initially, but now
Right.
what support do I have? My next door neighbor that doesn't know that.
Right, that doesn't really understand where the neighbor's gone. And you're so correct. Fort Stewart, of course, we left, had family support groups in place, and those groups have developed over the years as well.
Mm-hmm.
They become much more refined and much more stabilized because you have civilians working within it. You have more funding supporting those activities. But as a reservist deploying, it's a totally different ballgame because I was a pharmaceutical sales manager with a company I was working before I retired. And basically, not only did you leave your family, you left your job, you left, you had people that would, I go to work today and, next week I'm going to Kuwait again, right? So with the family part of that, my wife, Nicole, who's, like I said, we've been married 31 years, 2 kids, it was a whole different dynamic because it was the reserves had a pretty good way of contacting people and talking to people, but I lived in Kentucky. My unit headquarters was in Alabama. Okay, that's where I worked out. That's where I drilled out of. So it was a little harder to make those connections. I mean, they could make phone calls. She could make phone calls, but that was a stretch too. A whole different dynamic of deploying, right? And when you do that, people in the neighborhood they really don't know what to expect. They don't know where you are. You just disappeared. And one of the best experiences I will say I had with that was I had 2 kids across the street from me. One of them is a Marine now. He was they were in the 8th and 9th grade at the time. My son was kindergarten age. He was 5 years old. Every day, those kids would come and get my son and play with him in the yard because they knew I was gone. So the community definitely supported us, but they didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what to support. So it was a different dynamic when you have 2 kids versus no kids in deploying. And like you said, when you're on installation, that's one thing. But when you're living in, I was living in Kentucky. My unit's in Birmingham. I deployed with a unit out of New Orleans, and no one knows who my wife is unless she calls that unit. So I think we've come a long way with that.
Absolutely.
Because by the time I went back a few days in 2012, there was a better connectivity for for service members, families, and reserve units. So the reserves have done a great job with that, but I think we still got a long way to go.
Well, the reserve. I was reserve, and there's no describing it unless you walk in those moccasins, and it's hard for someone that's never served to appreciate or understand what. And I belittle myself about being in the reserves after and not going and serving in Nam, but there's also a tension there that I could have been called up on a moment's notice.
Absolutely.
Right.
And people don't understand that, and nor do you expect them to understand it. But it was a means of serving.
But you were willing and able,
Yes, sir.
Right.
I don't know about willing, but able.
Right. And I think for the most part, David General Dix, we all know all these guys that put this uniform on. We really love it. I'm not gonna say we definitely don't love going to war, but we love what we do because I think if you poll the military and you ask them if they value the Constitution or the military pay, they're gonna go to the Constitution any day because they understand what the Constitution's about. And I think that's another thing that's changed over the period of time from when I joined as a private in '82 until I retired in 2013 is that we grow as soldiers, and the Army's done a decent job of teaching us what this Constitution's about, especially leadership.
Absolutely.
Because you learn, and once you learn, you see things differently. You get the high ground now, and you understand that this is not about you having a career. It's not about you, being a hero. It's about the Constitution. And I think our soldiers are so better educated now that they get that. So we do go through a lot of things that people don't understand or don't see, and don't understand. I look at my wife and I wonder, 31 years of a couple of deployments, and it's like you miss a year at a time. I looked at, my son was a senior in high school. I looked at his pictures from kindergarten one day, and I had never seen them. I didn't remember them because I was gone that year. So, and so many soldiers have done that so many times. General Dix is one. David,
absolutely.
I think you said your son's a major. I'm sure he's probably done it. And all our soldiers, again, should be thanked every time you see them.
No question.
Right.
Thank you for your service, sir, by the way. And,
Thank you.
It's this is what this show's all about.
Absolutely.
Is the stories and letting people know what it's like. And your wife obviously knows what it's like. And and if somebody's listening, they have a wife that has been left behind at one point or the other.
Or husband.
Right.
Or significant
That's
other.
right.
Yep.
That's
and
right.
We'd like to talk to them about doing a show.
Okay. Well, shameless plug time for me then. Can I do that real quick?
Absolutely.
Well, I always say do this. I just want to thank my wife because it probably helped that I was gone a lot because she raised our kids. My daughter's a Harvard grad working on a PhD now. My son's at Brown University, and my daughter Nikki, which is Richard's daughter, is at North Carolina A&T, and his wife, my wife, they've done these things that people don't really understand, and not just our wives. There's so many. The military spouse is the strongest soldier in the Army, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
They put up with so much, and yet they continue to serve. So they're what we call the force multipliers, if you ask me. I mean, without the spouse and family, and not just spouses, significant others, parents, brothers, sisters, it's the support that soldiers rally around.
Absolutely.
So, and that's increased since Desert Storm as well, I think.
And here again, it's my belief that the public has no clue. Absolutely. And as Richard and I've talked, my opinion is, the General and I've talked, I'm sorry, but that my opinion is there's no larger fraternity or sorority than the military. Right. And you become your brothers from here on out, your sisters from here on out. And
right.
I don't know if it's a smell that military makes a body put off, but you just instantly recognize a brother military, and it doesn't matter what unit, what division, what service.
Right.
You just recognize them as being a brother or a sister.
It might be a haircut sometimes.
It might be. A brother from a different mother?
Yes,
like that?
absolutely.
Yeah. A brother from another mother, that's right. And it goes so far, like, General Dixie, he's met my parents before they passed away. I've met his parents. I mean, it's just, and the family just keeps extending. It just keeps extending. And at the end of the day, that's who's there for you,
Well, what is your either fondest or scariest memory about Desert Shield and Desert Storm?
Seeing General Dix out on those missions he talked about. That was probably my scariest because, and as a young guy, I think I was 25 years old at the time. You always worry about. I think my scariest thing in Desert Storm was my concern was chemical attacks or getting in a situation where we couldn't do our mission, basically, right? Because as you know, we were again in my opinion, we were in a new environment. There was a lot of talk of chemical warfare with Saddam Hussein and the way he tried to fight. But the key was, I think, the key was our technology. We owned the night, right? And even then, as you talk about transition points, one of the things for me, think about things like GPS, right? They gave us these green boxes that were like bigger than, like big as a shoebox, right? Almost a GPS, right? And General Dix would probably tell you, I didn't want to take one because I'm like, I know how to read a map, I'm good. I don't want them zeroing in on me on this technology, right? This is 1990.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to today, I can't get across town without a GPS, and I can't even see it. I just see a little screen in my car, right? If you think about it, or on my phone. So things that scared us then were the unknown. You know, what technology did they have? What chemicals they would try to use? What the logistics train would look like going across the desert? And I think we definitely fixed that. So those things were things that I worry about. Of course, I worry about the family at home. All that's on the plate. But at the end of the day, I think it and I don't want to sound redundant, but it goes back to were my soldiers going to be okay?
Mm-hmm.
You know, were my soldiers that were 18, 19 years old going to be okay?
Mm-hmm.
And another shameless plug. So 3 weeks ago, I'm riding around Fort Knox, and I see a sign, and it's I don't know if I guess I can say it's the HRC command here at Fort Knox, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I see a sign that says Command Sergeant Major Lanice Thorpe, Noel. She's the HRC Sergeant Major, Human Resources Command for the Army, Sergeant Major.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw the sign, I almost cried, but I screamed, because going back to what we're talking about, this young lady was a private first class, and she was about 19, maybe 20 years old at the time, right? Now she's the Command Sergeant Major of the Army's Human Resources Command. And when I look at things like that, and I look at General Dix, who was my lieutenant when I was a captain, and we have another Command Sergeant Major, Bryant, out at Fort Gordon, that I want to throw her name out there. These people, we were so young, and now they've all become Army leaders. I mean, senior Army leaders. And when you look at that, that's why the concern for the soldier is so important. Because we allow, when I think about Sergeant Major Thorpe, she was a private. It's like, you know, she was running our operations as a private because we saw the talent. General Dix was a guy, I saw the leadership ability. I saw the hunger for being a great leader. And I thank God for that discernment where I was able to see that. But that's one thing about our Army, is that I will say our leadership is developed to a point of not just, you know, training people with memorization. We train people to think. And we train people, you know, not what to think, but to think, and to think out of those boxes and to make things happen. So that's just how I look at it. But as far as fear, I'm a God-fearing man, and I put my faith and trust in God during those situations. And I have always said, basically, you know, God has my life in His hands. And I think a lot of our soldiers, I don't want to speak for them, but a lot of our soldiers that I know have that same mentality. And we know we are people that are designed to do things, and those things may not be popular, they may not be understood, but we do those things. And I think the faith in the Army, in whatever faith you have, I think faith is one of the things that the Army does support, regardless of where you're from.
The one thing you said a minute ago made me feel like my friendship with Moses was true. And that is when you were talking about the GPS. I bet neither one of you ever saw the first Starlight Scope.
Saw the first what?
Starlight Scope.
Seeing in the dark.
Believe it or not, we had those.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, we did.
Where everything was green at the other end?
Yeah, on the 50
I
cows.
trusted my map, though. I trusted my map. Even though it had those terrain features in the desert on it, I trusted my map.
Hey, so talk about the culture in Saudi Arabia once we hit the ground. How was that?
Okay. Within the local in Saudi Arabia? That was interesting. As you know, our female soldiers, they didn't want them to drive vehicles. They had to, of course, I remember they had to wrap their heads up, you know, obeying the law of Saudi Arabia. I remember seeing, when we did contracts, I remember seeing a pizza place that said no women allowed. I remember that, right? But one thing I do, and on the flip side of that, though, I remember, and you may remember this too, when some of our soldiers, female soldiers, went on what do you call it, like a liaison visit, where some of the Saudis invited them into their homes, and they came back with a different perspective of basically how Saudi life was versus American life. And I think our soldiers learned a lot from that. There were a lot of things that they came back and said, wow, the woman runs the home, you know. But then on the flip side, they're like, but they don't want me to drive this vehicle on the street. So I think the culturally, for what exposure we had, it was totally different for all of us, because I think if you look at Middle East presence, it was one of the early times for us as a force to be there.
Right.
So we just had to learn. We learned a lot. We learned a lot, and I just think two different worlds, United States and a lot of countries. If you line up a lot of countries in the world, we are the best place in the world to live. You know, regardless of what opportunities you think you have or don't have, when you lay it all out, this is still a land of opportunity. It's the best place in the world to live, where you have a chance to rise based on your own merit. And you have to work. You just have to work.
Sir, we got to take a quick break. Can you stay with us just for a few minutes, and we'll wrap up the interview?
Yes, sir.
Cool.
Good morning. My name is Mike Mizell. I'm a retired Army colonel and president of the Johns Creek Veterans Association. We meet in Newtown Park, and part of one of our projects is the installation of the Healing Wall, the half-scale model of the Vietnam Wall that traveled the United States. Well, it's coming to rest, and it's going to live in Johns Creek forever, the half-scale model. We're looking at possibly a March implementation ribbon cutting ceremony, and we're looking for donors and sponsors that want to help us in this great project. You can donate at jcvets.org.
Hello.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
Because I was almost killed on one of the
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you. And we're back on America's Web Radio, and this is just like being in the Army. I'm surrounded by officers. I don't know if that's a good thing or no. It's a good thing, and particularly when there are two officers like General Dix and Lieutenant. It's Colonel or Lieutenant Colonel?
Lieutenant Colonel.
Colonel.
Retired.
Wilson. And sorry, I didn't mean to demote you by any means, but.
That's another story.
Well, no,
it's okay.
I was telling General Dix when we were off the air, there's just something about the military, and not that there aren't a few bad apples somewhere, but I've been very fortunate. I haven't met them coming into the studio. I haven't met them even when I was on active duty or on reserve duty. They're just good folks.
Oh yeah,
and everybody has a love for the country. And
right.
If we could get over so many ills, in my opinion, in D.C. if everybody felt like a person that's gone through the military in some shape, form, or fashion.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
get back to the basics of selfless service. That's that's one of the keys. So. Colonel Wilson, one of the things that we talked about was our ability to recall the reserves and the National Guard and get them trained and get them prepared to go. Can you talk about some of the experiences while we were sitting in the deserts and having the reserve and the National Guard fall in, and how it's evolved to today's total force concept and the things that you're doing at Fort Knox?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. Because right now, if you remember Desert Storm, you remember the 48th Brigade, Georgia National Guard, right, was supposed to be the brigade to round out the 24th. That was the concept we had there. The brigade would come in and help the division, right? So that brigade never really made it, right? Because they had to go and train. And again, at that time, when you have National Guard reserves, at that time, there was not a lot of training for that type of mission, just like the active Army, but it was it was different because there just was not the resources put toward the reserve component.
Right.
And I joined as a private into the reserves when I came in as a private. It was pretty laid back. Good unit, but pretty laid back. So when you look at what happened with the 48th, and if you read about it, they never got there. So the Army gave us another brigade to come in, basically, because they weren't trained, they weren't prepared to go. So when you look at the evolution now, when you look at Iraqi freedom, enduring freedom, what has changed is that the reserves are, in my opinion, they're ready. They're ready because they took that lesson learned and said, okay, we got to be ready next time. And if you look at professional schooling, the opportunities have increased for reservists. When you look at the training opportunities to be in leadership positions has increased in the reserves. Units they've become much more professional organizations. Not that they were not professional, but they're ready to supplement the active duty. And now I think it's more of a one force now with the Army than it was in 1990, 91. But it's one force because, as I said, when I deployed the first time, I was active duty with 24th, and when I deployed in 2004, I deployed as a reservist with a reserve headquarters that was the 377, but then I was infiltrated into 3rd Army headquarters as a planner on that staff.
Right.
And there was no, well, he's a reservist, he doesn't know this, he doesn't know. That was, okay, Al, you have to do this job. This is your job. So it was no expectation of failure at all because of the training and the resources the Army put behind the reserve component over that period of time. So as I said earlier, I went from a pharmaceutical sales manager, drilling on the weekends, to the chief of plans for deployment, redeployment in Kuwait overnight.
Wow.
Because of the Army, if you look at how we trained and how we were able to go to Command General Staff College, all these different schools, you were prepared. And I think, shameless plug again, I think the reserve is that come in like that. A lot of these guys are professionals in their own career fields. You had lawyers, you had engineers, all these guys that come in, and they would also bring a different perspective from their civilian career.
Absolutely. To
what the Army does all the time. And I think in situations like Kuwait and Iraq, all that was a plus.
Yep.
Because now you have more than one way of looking at things. So I think it has definitely evolved. Of course, like everything else, it probably needs a little work. But from 90 to 2013, you have a whole different force.
Sir,
because the reserves are so important right now.
You were probably exposed to this, and I know the public has no clue, but the three of us can talk AR, NG, and know what we're talking about. But AR, Army Reserve, NG, National Guard. So what's and you have National Guard that's my first, when I was in the National Guard, it was mechanized infantry. So we learned, we played with the big toys like the guys in the AR did. But what is your overview of AR, NG yesterday and today? Like you said, they're better trained now than they ever were. But back then, when I was in, back in the 70s, there was a whole difference between AR and NGs.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think now that there really is no difference. And just like I said, even when I went to the AMC staff, you go in as a reservist. When you walk in that door, you are a lieutenant colonel.
Yep.
You walk in that door, you're a major, you're a captain. And again, the cooperation and communication between those organizations across the years has gotten so much clearer, and the goals are set forth that these National Guard Reserve guys like me, we were trained, and we had to be able to keep up. It was not a situation where, when I go into briefs as Sea Fleet Commander, he didn't ask me if I was Reserve or National Guard.
Yep.
He just wanted to know what he needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that went away. That's gone away now because of the cooperation that's happened between the three services.
And
I'm very partial to the reserves because I'm a reserve guy, right? But at the same time, I have good friends that are National Guard officers, good friends that are active duty officers, and I think we can all pretty much bring the same value to the table. Everybody just has different experiences.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to the core responsibilities of each rank, I think we've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, and I will tell you, David, while we were in Afghanistan, the reservists made up about 90% of our staff. We may have had 3 active duty soldiers, and the rest of the personnel were all reservists and National Guard. And, just like Colonel Wilson alluded to, the extras that they brought to the table were invaluable. I had a couple of agricultural experts that were actually doing support operations on my staff for huge logistics operations. And I was able to send them to Gardez to help the farmers out with their planting season. And, that was instrumental in keeping those guys from turning to the drug poppy seed and planting that, as opposed to a crop that they could actually sell at the market, and turn a profit for their family and stuff legally.
Right.
You mean there would have been a place for me with a degree in agriculture?
Absolutely.
Of course. Of course.
Building outhouses in the sand.
Yes.
And same thing with the contracting world. You had guys that were civilian contractors that did government contracts in the civilian world, and they fell right into the Sea Fleet headquarters, and they did the same thing basically they did in the civilian world, and they were better for it because they did it every day. So it's a lot of there's a lot of coexisting elements that have made the Army better. I just think we're better for it.
I think this is one thing that makes America, the United States, the greatest in the world. We have to be the most flexible, and we can push and shove and bend and turn to any situation, whereas nobody's ordering anybody to do this or do that when you're not in uniform. And so you bring to the table things that a breadline will never be able to bring.
Absolutely.
That's correct.
Well, got to be right some of the time.
You did good.
So, Al, let's talk about your current position at Knox and what you're doing at the Transition Center.
Well, that's funny. I just started a job last week, right? I was officially retired. So I became a counselor for Soldier for Life, the Transition Assistance Program, which is another thing that even 2013 as a reservist, I wasn't required to do this program. And what Transition Assistance Program does is you guys have heard of Soldier for Life, basically, right? And what we do, I work at the Virtual Center, and we are counselors for those soldiers that are getting ready to retire, ETS, getting out of the Army involuntarily or voluntarily. So what they do is they basically, there's a set of courses that the Army requires soldiers to take to help soldiers do things like align their MOS, which is their military job, with civilian jobs. It helps them identify things that they can do outside of the Army when they leave. It helps them develop things like a budget. If you have a soldier that's been in the Army 5 years, he's going to get out. We try to help him sort out, does he have enough money saved in case he doesn't get that job to basically survive for the next few months. once he gets out of the Army, right? Because once you got out of the Army, that paycheck stops. You move out of the barracks. You move out of housing. The other thing is, one of the things I think we do that's very important, we connect them with how to get aligned with the VA for any assistance they would need as far as health, mental health, what have you. We make sure that they're enrolled in the VA system. We also look at, when you look at this thing, so many pieces, right? But it's things that if you got out, if you were in the Army, Vietnam era, or even right after that storm, you didn't have this. The Army came up with ACAP. This is like an extension of ACAP, the Army Career Alumni Program, and it's been transitioned to a Transition Assistance Program. So basically, a soldier can call me today from Iraq. He knows he's getting out of the Army in 9-10 months, and we can start his process of, are you going to college when you get out? Are you going to use your GI Bill to go to school? How are you planning to function after you get out of the Army? And believe me, I think this is probably one of the best programs I've seen in the Army so far. It's a lot of work for the soldiers at points where you have to attend classes. You can do the classes virtually online. You can do them online or virtual. And these classes basically walk the soldier through the process of getting out of the Army. And what happens is a lot of these soldiers, they're ending up now with jobs. They have a plan of what they're going to do when they get out. And it's an awesome program. I've been affiliated with it for right at 2 weeks now. And it's amazing after getting out, because I was a reservist, and it even helps reservists. As a reservist, I just went back to my job.
Right.
I worked for Abbott Labs, and they really supported the military, right? So I went back to work, and everything was fine. A lot of guys that are reserved, they don't have a job to go back to.
Right.
So we actually help these soldiers with resumes. We help them with budgets. We help them identify, how much money they think they need to make. It's a great program. And if soldiers are required to go through this program now.
Right. So
Every
this is
soldier
that
has to go
attempt
through
to eradicate homelessness once those
Exactly.
veterans hit the street. So
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. But to have a soldier, when you think about it, if I had gotten out at 19, 20 years old, I don't think I would have had the direction of what do I want to do next.
Right.
So it helps them channel their skills that they've learned in the Army, or if their skills don't align, it allows them to be able to go and find something that they're interested in, and that the Army they can use, how they can use their GI Bill. It's a lot of things involved that really I think soldiers know about now. Congress legislated this a few years ago, and it really makes sense. It's just a great program.
Colonel, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the GI Bill or other monies available cover tech schools? The general is shaking his head, so obviously they must. Okay, because that is so important. That back 400 years ago, when I went into school, oh my God, you're going to a tech school. I mean, you just wouldn't. You went to a 4-year university, and that was acceptable. Right. Whereas a tech school wouldn't. But so many of these, I was just envisioning the number of guys that come out of even that other branch that floats around in boats.
Right.
But the mechanics that come out of there that could go to a tech school, and God, they'd be standing in line waiting for them.
Right. And they, my understanding, I think, is as all of the schools are accredited institution, the GI Bill will pay for those schools. And so many soldiers are taking advantage of that. It's just awesome.
Let me put the shoe on the other foot. Do all of the people that are transitioning out know about you all?
What they do now, right? In the Army they do now. I think the Air Force Marines, if they're stationed in the Army, they have the same similar programs right now. It's the entire military that's doing these programs.
It's mandatory.
Yes, they know about us because it's a mandatory event. You cannot leave the Army without completing this program.
Fantastic.
And that's what really makes it special. You have to, because frankly, you don't know what you don't know when you get out of the Army. You just don't know. When I came off active duty, I went to job interviews at a job fair, and the job I did not want is the one that I end up taking, and it ended up being a career for me for 20 years. Because I went in like I'm a captain. I want to be a manager. I want to lead people, and I go to a job fair, and the guys that were there asked me. The guy that hired me goes, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to be a leader. I want to work for this company." He goes, "Okay, go see this pharmaceutical company." So I go down, and the guy goes, "What do you know about pharmaceuticals?" "Nothing." I said, "What do you know about doctors and calling a doctor?" I said, "Nothing." And he goes, "Well, you know what? You're the first guy that's been here all day that's been honest with us. We're going to move you on to the next section of the interviews." So 20 years later, I retired from Abbott Labs.
Wow.
He said, you've been honest with us. You have a master's. We know you can learn. We just need people that have the integrity to go in and sell drugs to doctors. So if you think about this, right, it goes back to that soldier value and the mentors I had.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite mentor, I don't know if he's out there, but Colonel Donald Porter was my mentor,
cool.
And he pulled me to the side. He's mentored so many. He pulled me to the side to tell me, you've got to make this happen. This is a golden opportunity, and you can do this. I know you're from Alabama, and you like Alabama football and all that, but I can follow me. Let me show you how to get there. And that's what I credit, General Dix and so many other leaders for doing that, to pull these guys to the side that they see a little potential in. Say, hey, you can do this. So, yeah, great programs.
So one of the things that you talked about was when we came back from Desert Storm,
Mm-hmm.
when we came across the parade field and you saw your family for the first time, can you let the audience know what that felt like?
I can't explain it. It's the greatest feeling in the world. It's you don't feel like you've done anything special, but you feel like this is where I belong. You know what I mean? I'm home. And then afterwards, you start learning. Like, it took me 10, 15 years to realize what we had really done.
Right.
Because it was just, mission. But when you come home, I think the joy for me was that my mom, who passed away 2 years ago, she saw me on CNN getting off the plane at Fort Stewart. And I said, "Mom, you didn't see me." And she goes, "Yeah, I saw you." I said, "What was I doing?" She said, "You had a tag hanging from a pistol, and you were trying to put it in your holster, right?" And I was like, "That's what I was doing coming off the steps, off the plane." So she saw me, and I said, for me, it was the fact that that made me realize she knew where I'd been.
Mm-hmm.
She saw it was a visual for her.
Right.
Not like many of my relatives who were Vietnam vets.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get that, and I pray that we keep trying to fix that for those that are remaining.
Right.
Because those guys deserve much more. If you ask me, they deserve that. And a lot of them didn't get it, and I can go down the line. My father-in-law, a lot of guys, they died in their 50s because they didn't get that.
Right.
So I think that feeling is one that every soldier, I don't care if you deployed and sat on a chair for a year, I think every soldier deserves to have that feeling for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, just being away.
Sir, what happens to the goosebumps when you see an honor guard and they're playing the Star Spangled Banner?
What happens to them?
Yeah.
They're here forever. All of my son's high school football games it's amazing. A lot of them they would have the veterans stand up, and then you start realizing, I'm this old guy now that's a veteran. You stand up and you just you put your hand on your heart, and it's amazing. It's a good feeling because you really know what it means.
Actually, I like the fact now that I don't know when it changed or who changed it, that if you are a veteran and you're at a public ceremony and there's an honor guard or the flag goes by or they do the national anthem, that instead of just crossing your heart, you can salute.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, right.
I think
and
that's great.
some people do that. I've seen that. You're right.
I think last night was a good example of trying to educate the American and the world public on, there were several veterans from World War II that, the greatest generation that, they even had a Tuskegee Airman.
Flip the coin, right?
Honorary Brigadier General McGee gave the referee the coin that was tossed last night, to lead the ceremony. And, each generation we've got to keep educating them, David. And programs like this are instrumental in telling the story.
Right. And then again, another reason I think we have to keep educating them is, here's the thing. Soldiers really don't want the attention. They don't want the attention. They they do their job. Most soldiers just do their job, and they're just like, I'm proud to do it, and I'm going to continue to live my life. But from my point of view, the soldiers, especially the enlisted soldiers in our Army, they deserve every bit of it.
Yep.
They deserve every bit of it. Officers deserve it too, don't get me wrong. But for the most part, the soldiers anyone that, in my opinion, again, that joined the Army after 9/11, they're sort of a hero to me. Yeah, there's something special about that kid. Because when I joined the Army, it was 1982. There was nobody fighting. I grew up around a bunch of Vietnam vets that said, "Don't go to the Army. It'll never work for you. Don't go to the Army." But when I became an officer, all those guys surrounded me. They just took care of me, and they taught me about how to be in the Army when I came home on leave. They would say, "Hey, don't do this, don't do that," and I think what again, back to that soldier, is that these guys, they just deserve, and they don't really want you to just go overboard. But as a nation, we just got to continue to do better by our veterans. Period.
Yeah. Keep saying thank you, shaking their hands.
Keep saying thank you. Right. And when you see them in need, there's an organization here in Louisville. Well, I think you've heard of USA Cares. They do a lot. They just do a lot. And Trace Chester, I think, is the head here in Louisville, and I see him every now and then at the gym, and just the things they do for veterans and their families. Those are the things that I think we really need to just keep focusing on.
I agree.
Before we're going to have to wind it up here shortly, and before we do, I want to mention the fact that I had the pleasure of being with General Dix and many other veterans last Wednesday at the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. It's in downtown Atlanta, right across the street from the state capitol, in the Sloppy Floyd building. And I might add, they have a pretty good cafeteria down there too. But this is so important, and Georgia seems to be taking a real lead in recognizing veterans and recognizing not only Georgia veterans, but if you've lived here 10 years, I believe, then you're considered a Georgia veteran. And if you're coming to Atlanta, please put that down on your calendar. And they do not supply the Kleenex. You have to bring your own Kleenex as you're going through it and reading about our real heroes. And the other thing is, I want to mention the fact we played a spot for them a minute ago that Johns Creek, Georgia, is bringing to a permanent location. It'll be in Newtown Park in Johns Creek, the Healing Wall, which is a replica of the Vietnam Wall in D.C. This is a wall that traveled all around the country and gave people an opportunity to touch and be with their loved ones one more time. And it'll be permanently in Johns Creek. And then I also want to mention Peachtree Corners, which I haven't been there, but not to their memorial that they have set up for veterans. And I understand that it's quite a place to go, and I do plan on maybe even this weekend I'll get over there. But remember your veterans and remember the people on active duty. And if you see a skinny kid with a blue, I don't even think they have blue anymore. But anyway, Major, that's my son. He probably needs a meal, so buy him a meal. No, I'm teasing about that. But if you do see somebody, or you see and I love this, you see a proud veteran that has a cap on, VFW or whatever it happens to be, do something nice for him. It'll make you feel a whole lot better than it does him. But buy him a meal, buy his family a meal, whatever. If you're in the airport or wherever you happen to be, because he didn't serve for himself. He served for you and our country. And that's, he loves our country. We know how much they love, and that goes for women too. I shouldn't leave out any women at all. Donna
Correct.
Rose, a beautiful example of that.
Amen.
Right.
So, I didn't mean to get on my soapbox, but it's my box. I can soap it down if I want. Colonel, thank you for being on with us today, and
Right.
I hope you'll accept my invitation. I don't know about the generals, but my invitation to please come back again.
Well, okay, I do, and I do plan on, once a Hall of Famer like General Dix invites me to the Georgia Military Hall of Fame, I will come, because I understand he's a member of that
Yes,
Hall
sir.
of Fame. So again, I will plug my hat and say, my lieutenant who became a general is a Hall of Famer, so I must have been okay.
Well,
Yeah.
Cool.
He is working on
Cool.
his second career or third career,
Right.
singing Jodies. Anyway,
Right.
with that being said,
Right.
we got to get out of here.
Right.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with the Georgia Military Hall of Fame Hour. Thank you
Thank
for
you, sir.
listening.
Cool.
Yes, sir.
God bless.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
You
still there?
On the money.
Want to give your family or
Loved one the perfect gift? Then go online and check out the TornadoBodyDryer.com. I love mine and the warm heat